All right, I will call this meeting to order. We good?
Are you sure?
All right. All right, do it again.
There you go.
There we go. All right, good evening, everyone. It is October 10th, 2024. I'll call this meeting to order, the regular board meeting of the Olentangy School Board. Mr. Jenkins, can you please call the roll?
Mr. Lester.
Here.
Dr. Dabrico.
Here.
Dr. Wallach.
Here.
Mr. O'Brien.
Here.
Ms. Schreiber.
Here.
All right, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, I don't believe we have any amendments to the agenda.
Nope.
All right, hearing none. Can I please have a motion to approve?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Any discussion? All right, hearing none. Mr. Jenkins, please call the roll.
Oh, not off to a good start. It wasn't marked, it wasn't marked as action.
It's going to be a long night.
Everybody's getting used to the new devices,
Yeah.
huh?
These computers are just a fad anyway.
Yeah.
All right, who is the motion?
Me.
And Dr. Dabrico, be the
Yes,
second?
sir. Yep.
Okay. All right, Dr. Dabrico.
Yes.
Dr. Wallach.
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien.
Yes.
Ms. Schreiber.
Yes.
Mr. Lester.
Yes. Okay. Good start, everyone. Good start. Okay. We have a very long meeting tonight with a lot on the agenda, so I'll keep my remarks pretty brief here. I do want to highlight an event that we have coming up next week, the Bridging the Future Partner Showcase with our Bridge Ed program. I think as everyone knows, if you drive around anywhere around town, you see that this area is growing, and Columbus as a whole is growing. I think we're supposed to get about another 1 million people or so over the next 20 years, and a large part of that growth is coming in Delaware County. As we start to see employers like Intel and some of these other places come to relocate and to set up shop here, having a strong workforce that's able to handle all these jobs is really imperative, and it's something that we as a school district are really taking quite seriously. We've been working with this Bridge Ed group for a number of years now to really try to start to get students on a path earlier where they understand what the paths are available to them, when they understand what the job market has, and then we start to link them up with people through internships and education opportunities. It's really a wonderful program that we have, and this event next week will really be a showcase for a lot of that, and we'll start to have a lot of information about what's going on there. I still believe, is it Lieutenant Governor's still going to be there?
He will have a video introduction, and then Director Dakin from the Ohio Department of Workforce will be here.
Okay. So, really, I think the work that we're doing here is certainly getting noticed around the state, but more importantly, I think it's providing a pretty large benefit to our community. So I encourage everyone to take a look at that and come out, and we'll look forward to seeing you there. All right, with that, any committee updates since we've last? Anything? Okay, good. All right, we will jump straight into the agenda then. The first presentation is the Olentangy High School softball turf project. So Ms. Yanez, the softball head varsity coach.
All right, thanks guys. So I am Liz Yanez. I'm the head varsity coach of Olentangy softball. We're super excited to present our turf project to you guys. As you know, this is kind of the next move for all field sports, is getting turf, especially in our climate. So we'll dive right in. So my board is not here. They were at the last meeting, but they've been, awesome in terms of helping me get this project off the ground and get the support that we need. I'll go through the introduction of the project, the financial review. I do have construction and drainage specs and comparison of products. I'm happy to dig in as far as you would like, but it's pretty straightforward, I think. That's my board. Again, why turf? I think, again, this is pretty self-explanatory. Living in Ohio, it makes it really hard, and especially with sports being kind of all year round festivities these days. The ability to get out on our field in months where we normally would not be able to is imperative to stay competitive. It does decrease the field maintenance time and money. We spend a significant amount, my coaches and I and the field crew do, maintaining the field, as well as financially, we put new diamond dirt and diamond dry and chalk and all of that every couple of years. We have to purchase that. So it's a large investment that we will be happy to alleviate from the program by this project. And then obviously increased revenue streams, we'll be able to rent the facility. I'm not going to go through all of this. Again, I got into some pretty detailed information, but Field Turf is the company that we're going with. Part of the reason we're doing that, and it is different from what some of the other schools have put in their baseball and softball fields. We did a lot of research, and we found that for softball, we felt Field Turf was really the best product. I won't get into all the details, but one of the biggest things is that their infill is a little bit different than everyone else's. More sand-based than rubber-based, so it's going to play a lot more like a softball field would, rather than with all the rubber pellets that have those big bounces and things like that. Vasco Sports Contractors is the contractor that will install Field Turf products, so that's who we would go with. Time frame for install is about 5 to 6 weeks, so we would be excited to get that started. It's the varsity infield only. We'll have the Braves logo inlay behind home plate, and then we're going to do our third base bullpen, which is just behind our dugout. So estimated completion date would be November, December. And the life of the installation with proper maintenance, I always want to say that, which of course we will do, about 12 to 14 years. Questions on this slide? Okay. So here's the specific pricing. The total is $301,250. We were very, very blessed to get a private donation for the full amount of this. So we're thankful for the group that did that and excited to get this started. Plan for replacement, we will set aside $5,000 each year into a fund that will go towards replacement. Obviously, we'll continue to run the fundraisers that we do now to help fund that. Field rentals and things like that will also help. And we would expect, because we've spoken to the donators, that another donation would be in the works when the replacement would need to be done.
Just one question.
Sure.
Just to clarify. So how much money of the district is helping with this?
Zero.
$0. So
That's
this
correct.
100% from someone else. Great.
Yep. One nice thing about this is while they're excavating the varsity field, our Shanahan Middle School needs a little bit of love on their softball field. So we're going to have them take what they excavate off of our field, which is pretty new Washington ball mix, and we'll get that put on Shanahan's field to help that program out as well. I am not going to go through all of this. You are all more than welcome to, but these are the construction and drainage specs. Very important to the installers, not so much here. And I did put some comparisons together. Again, not going to go through this. The biggest thing here is the rubber sand mixture is kind of what sets this product apart for softball itself. But generally speaking, it's a great product. I just wanted to outline what some of the other facilities had used. And that's what it'll look like. There are additional photographs of work that they've done, that Field Turf has done. I'm happy to go through those, but I'm also happy to, with your very long agenda, allow you to move on.
Some of the other places that they've done are pretty impressive. I mean,
Yeah.
these are not minor endeavors.
Right.
Can you remind us of some of the,
Yep, I sure can. So there's the list. I did do mostly high school, but Ashland University is one of their newest installations. And then I can get down to the picture of it, but the Akron Racers Stadium, which is where the state softball tournament is played every year, they used Field Turf for their installation as well. This is a full installation at Ashland. We will not be doing the outfield. Our field guys take great care of our outfield. Shelby High School, Archbishop Hoban, put in a whole facility that is a multi-purpose use facility. Some of these smaller schools, Westlake is a decent size. I don't want to go too fast, but I'll get there. There's Firestone Stadium. That was the installation that they did, which is again where the state tournaments played.
Great.
Any other questions?
just a quick comment. So this expands the season. Otherwise, you're not playing softball in November and December. You're not practicing on the field. So expanded season means expanded opportunities for kids.
Yep.
Tournaments can come in.
Yep.
I appreciate Mr. Meyer's hard work, maybe last summer or the summer before, on the tiered system for using the fields, which prioritizes our Olentangy kids. So just really appreciate your hard work to make this happen.
Absolutely. Appreciate you guys having us, and we're super excited. We'll send you some pictures.
Yeah, it sounds great. And just really want to recognize the generosity of these donors. For
sure.
We're very lucky to have, so many donors. We've seen it in the Liberty practice field, and this is just yet another great example of people stepping up to really support the community.
Yeah, our community is amazing in the way that it supports our youth and future generations, so we're very lucky.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you guys, appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Meyer, I believe you're next.
All right, thank you. You know, once upon a time back in the 1990s, when I first started teaching, I was a softball coach and coached at Firestone Stadium in Akron. I was in Akron, yeah. It was great for the girls to play in there, absolutely. Yeah. So I do want to welcome, it looks like, so AP Gov students from Berlin High School, correct? This is awesome. Look at how many we have here. So welcome to the board meeting. We have, as you know, we have great students across this great district, so thank you for being here. Real quick, I have a few highlights because I know that we have a lot on the agenda tonight, but I do want to highlight Berlin High School Environmental Club and Biology Club students who worked planting beds at the new Berlin Farm Family Garden. So actually, we had a retired teacher, Amy Eichen, retired Olentangy educator, and garden coordinator who coordinated this with students from Berlin High School. So again, just another example of community partnerships that we have with our students in the community. I'd like to recognize and congratulate our 22 high school seniors who received the distinguished honor of being named National Merit semifinalists and 39 seniors named Commended Scholars. We will recognize these students at our next board meeting later in October. Again, the semifinalists represent the top 1% of the students who took the PSAT, and over 1 million students from across the country take that PSAT. So extremely proud of their efforts. Want to highlight Superintendent Advisory Council, which we had a couple weeks ago. I'll say one of my favorite days, but we meet once a quarter, but really we have students representative from all 4 high schools, have great discussion, and they really are engaged and provide us some great insight from the student perspective and offering student voice to things that are going on in Olentangy. So At the last Superintendent Advisory Council, we discussed the new cell phone policy, and they gave us some great feedback on how it's working in their individual schools and suggestions as we move forward as a district in what that might mean for students. We also talked about the senior exit survey. If you remember from last year's Superintendent Advisory Council gave us a lot of feedback on designing that instrument. And again, we do exit surveys at 5th grade, 8th grade, and 12th grade. So just a couple takeaways from the survey. One was timing. They suggest we might want to just move that up to maybe the end of the sophomore year or the junior year. And really talked about, as seniors, the stress of college applications, the stress of competitiveness as far as class rank. So as a district, we'll continue to have conversations, but great discussion. Their favorite school experience so far, seniors, so I jotted down just a few. So hall decorating for homecoming, working on the school newspaper, 70th year yearbook edition at OHS. That was a big edition that came out. Camping out for a senior spot. So at one of the schools, they have to camp out to actually get the spot for painting their spot. That's important. Parking is really important at our high schools. And one student early release time, additional early release time, so he can nap in the. So I thought that was interesting, but just a really great group, and again, one of my favorite things to do during the year. I want to
Just note
highlight
on that, just for the students that are here, one of the really important parts of government is listening to all the constituents, right? And you all are a big part of our constituents. So there are a lot of ways that we go about doing this. I really applaud you for the student or the advisory council you do. Our mental health committee, for example, we have student representatives. When we were hiring Mr. Meyer as superintendent, we had students participate in focus groups, right? So finding ways to have that voice is really important to us. If there are ways that as you're going through, especially those of you that are studying government at a high level and in these sorts of classes, if there are ideas that you have or you want to discuss that with us, please don't hesitate to let us know. We're always happy to hear, have the student voice be part of that process.
Absolutely, absolutely, and they bring some really, really good insight to the table. Want to highlight, so Olentangy High School students with, along with teacher Mr. Seller, attended the Delaware County Treasurer's 2024 Economic Summit a couple weeks ago. I know Dr. Wallach was there and Ms. Davis and I were there, so they got to meet Lieutenant Governor Husted, gaining perspective on the U.S., Ohio, and Central Ohio's economy from industry leaders in attending the event. And again, Mr. Lester already said, we talked about workforce, and again, Delaware County is such a great county to raise a family. We have great schools, but more importantly, the Central Ohio economic region is very, very strong. Action items for tonight, just a few standard action items with human resources, with certified, supplemental, classified, and classified substitutes. We do have 2 retirements that I want to recognize, John Smith and Teresa Evans. John Smith has been with Olentangy for 11 years, since 2013, and then Teresa Evans has been with Olentangy for 22 years, since 2002. So both transportation drivers, and again, retiring and going to do some great things after retirement. But I also want to highlight, we're always hiring drivers, always hiring drivers. So I know they continue to work on that. We have a few student overnight and out-of-state field trips on the agenda. And then we have in the business management facilities item to declare transportation as impractical for a few students. And then we have a recommendation to approve an agreement with Train in the amount of $206,134 for renewal services for the chiller unit at Liberty High School. And as you remember, from time to time, we do bring these recommendations to make sure that we're doing the proper preventative maintenance on our chillers to maintain that life as long as we can. Important dates coming up. Just want to highlight again, end of the first quarter. It's flying by, so October 16th. Again, Mr. Lester mentioned the Bridge Ed Bridging the Future. Next week, October 16th at Olentangy High School, so we're excited to offer that event. We have a classified interview day coming up on October 22nd. School Links Parent Webinar, which is October 23rd. That's a really good session for parents to engage parents with School Links, because School Links offers a lot of resources and information to our students and parents. And then our next Board of Education meeting will be Thursday, October 24th, 6:30 at Liberty High School.
All right, any questions? All right, hearing none, thank you.
Wait, we can grill them.
All right, Mr. Jenkins. We'll set the timer now.
Good evening, board members. Yes, I've already been warned with all the slides I have, so my goal is to be as laconic as I possibly can. So the 5-year forecast, look how many slides I went through that fast. Statement of beginning balances, revenues, expenditures, and ending balances. This is the 5-year forecast really in one slide. In many ways, you could almost say this is it. You look at our revenue, plus our beginning balance minus our expenses. We have the ending projected balance, and remember the 5-year forecast is for the general fund. So we also project at the very bottom how many days cash that is on a 365-day basis. Clearly, we are in good shape right now, but it doesn't take long, and you can see towards the outer years of the 5-year forecast, the budget deficits each year will pretty well eliminate the carryover by the 28-29 school year.
Can I ask questions on the slides as you go before you
Sure.
give one? So is there a change? Let me just say, there's a change from the spring till now, right?
Correct, and that will be covered in a slide later too.
Is that because the state contacted you and they're increasing our funding because of the levy failure?
No, we'll see later in the presentation that state funding is actually, as much as it's going to be, it will tail off. And then I can explain why we are being pushed to what is basically called the threshold minimum per pupil state amount. So no, there is no additional state funding anywhere in this presentation. Same slide as the previous one. This one's just, if you like pictures better. Obviously, the gray bars are the expenses, the black bars are the revenues. So whenever the black bar is bigger than the gray bar, that's a year where we have a budget surplus. Flip that around if you have the gray bigger than the black, and that's why you start to see the yellow line, which is cash balance, with a downward slope beginning with next fiscal year.
Does this include projected increases in staff that will be needed because of the projected enrollment
Yes.
increases? Okay.
Absolutely, and we'll see that in another
So
slide.
that's regardless of whether we build new buildings or not?
Regardless of whether we build buildings, when we grow at 250 to 300, sometimes as much as 400 students per year, we have to build in the needed staff to be able to make sure that students have adequate amounts of staff to be able to teach them each day. Absolutely.
Okay.
So this shows what we're spending per day here in 2025. When I say fiscal year 2025, just a shade over $1 million a day would be our forecasted expenditures per day. By the time we get to the 28-29 school year, that'll grow to about $1.3 million per day. This is a graph with double axes. On the left-hand side, you have daily spend. On the right-hand side, you would then have the days cash. And so the orange line represents how the days cash is declining to the point where at the end of the 28-29 school year, as forecasted right now, we would actually end with negative 31 days cash, which really isn't tenable. So those are some things that we'll have to discuss moving forward. What are the major sources of revenue? I'm not going to be covering every single source because we are about 85 to 90% across two sources. The first one is real estate revenue. This graph shows where we anticipate our total property valuation to go over the course of the next 4 calendar years. Now, the focus here shifts from fiscal to calendar because tax years are by calendar year. but the calendar year 2028 value of just a shade under $8.2 billion, 85% of that, though, is still residential values, subdivided family homes. So we are, for lack of a better word, what is called, as we know, a bedroom community. Most of our property valuation, we are very, very heavy on residential. What happens over time, and we discussed this quite a bit last year, as values increase, you can see the Class 1 tax rates and the Class 2 tax rates, they decrease. So you have your Class 1 rate, and then immediately to the right, the change per year. The Class 2 tax rate, immediately to its right, the change per year. As values go up, tax rates and voted millage go down. The reason there's a bigger chunk in 2026 is because that is our next triennial reappraisal. So you can see that our value from 2025 to 2026 goes up pretty substantially, and that's why the millage falls from 36.55 to 34.08. Again, that is a projection at this point in time, but you have a pretty sharp year where you go up almost $800 million, and so your tax rates are going to go down. Because of that, that's what keeps our year-over-year increases in real estate revenue from being enough to keep up with what we need. If you look and you're wondering why was 2022 such a big year, remember our last operating levy was passed in 2020. Collections would have begun in 2021, and they would have impacted 2 fiscal years, the 2020-21 school year and the 2021-22 school year. And it took those 2 school years for it to ramp up. That's why you see a significant jump in 2022. We're now used to or accustomed to that level of funding from our levies, and that's why in any subsequent year, you're only going to see the very residual small amount of inside millage, and then you see a jump here in 2025 because last year being a full reappraisal, remember calendar year 2023 affects fiscal years 24 and 25, we would have had some additional properties that were picked up in the full reappraisal that would have been new property. We also get a little bit more tax revenue off a new property. I know those numbers are nice numbers. I wouldn't mind having that money myself, but 4.5, 5, and we have obviously fiscal year 2025 is a little bit higher because of the reappraisal, but that does not keep up with the staffing and the expenses. And so that's why I included this graph, is to show that at 2, 3.8, 2.4, we have increases planned that just don't keep up with what happens on the staffing side. So our total revenue forecast, as you can see, I like to show this. Sometimes we treasurers are accused of being so conservative that our numbers aren't believable. We have reasonable increases built in to our real estate revenue. Going from this year, just a shade under $230 million at 228.2, up to $250.3 million by the 28-29 school year. But the pace at which it increases, as noted again, does not keep up with the pace at which expenses increase. So now I want to talk about the other significant source of revenue for the district, which is our state funding formula. We worked exceptionally hard to get the Fair School funding formula in place, and by and large it has been a very good formula for the district. We're getting more in state funding than we've ever gotten as a district. In the 2017-2018 era, we were getting barely $400 to $600 per pupil. One of the major pieces of the state funding formula now does look at what's called a base cost. You got your base cost with 2 different lenses, personnel versus non-personnel, and then the components, direct classroom instruction, building leadership, instruction and student support, and district leadership and accountability. This is the basic building block of how our core funding per pupil gets determined. The first thing that's done is cost inputs, which right now are frozen at 2022 levels, are then run through a formula, and at the end of the day, the state says that our base cost, if you take those two pieces and add them together, they're somewhere around $179 million in total base cost. We then take that $179,861,120 and we divide it by last year's enrollment. Why last year? Because that's what the formula says. So we divide it by 22,328, and so our base cost per pupil is just a shade under $8,100, $8,055. But that's not it. We're not done. I wish we got $8,055 per pupil. The state then takes a look at our local capacity and wealth per pupil, which they value at $264,808. The two components of that would be property wealth and income wealth. That figure, 264,808, is then multiplied by 2.5%. That's back to the old days of a property valuation charge-off. It's roughly equivalent to 25 mils. So in some ways what the state is assuming is that we're, as a minimum amount, going to come up with 25 mils against our local property wealth, which also includes income. That turns out to be $6,620 per pupil that the state expects us to come up with locally. The complement of that is what the state provides, which is $1,435. This shows it a little more clearly. $264,808 per pupil times 2.5% is $6,620. You then back that out of, remember the per pupil was $80.55, and so we get $1,435 per pupil from the state of Ohio. But look at the bottom line number from the state. It is dropping to $805, and then notice it stays right there. That 806 is just rounding. Why might that be? We are going to, because of our local valuation per pupil, we are being driven to a threshold, at least we have a threshold, that the state says you will be no less than 10% of the base cost will come from the state of Ohio. Notice that next year we are driven to that minimum threshold. Now, a couple of things that will affect that very dramatically is, will the state continue to increase the base cost inputs? Remember me telling you they come from 2022. We really need them to at least increase them for this next biennium, which by the way is the 26-27 biennium. They at least need to take it to 2024. I would love it if they just simply took it all the way up to 2026. Now, their point might be that the EMIS data isn't finalized yet. Regardless, the base cost has to grow. If you think about it, it should grow at least 7 to 8% per year in most traditional schools, because that's the pace, if you look at it, at how costs are increasing based on new staff, staff wage increases, all of those sorts of things. Point me out a school that probably doesn't have between 6 and 8% increase in expenses per year, and you've got a pretty exceptional and rare school. Right now, I do not have any cost adjustments into the base cost, because that is a factor that in the last biennium there was a lot of discussion about what based cost sets to use, and that is the biggest trigger by far. These numbers are indicative of the phase-in actually complying with law, even though the law is unwritten for next year. What I mean by that is I'm allowing the phase-in next year to go to 83% and then to fully funded the year after that. But you can see we're still being driven to that minimum state share because of the cost sets. If I were to not phase the funding in fully, this would be an even more brutal picture for the district, and I just don't think it's going to be that bleak. What I do think we'll have a lot of work on is to discuss what is an adequate base cost per pupil. I have data to suggest that even at $8,055 per pupil, most schools across the state of Ohio are spending well in excess of $14,000 to $15,000 per pupil per year. And right now that base cost number from the state is around $8,000. That is not a criticism of the state, not at all. The base cost that this formula predicts for all schools is much higher, though, currently right now, than what the state is allocating per pupil. A lot thrown at you in those two slides. Questions?
Do you have a sense, recognize it's not on here, but if we had updated these numbers to the 2024 sets, do you have a sense how that would change it?
Yeah, I've noodled around with that, and we keep the state share because of the way the state currently is doing it, is they will implement the new cost the first year of the biennium, and then they keep it flat. So what you would see with this graph is that 10% might next year jump to 14, but then we're always driven right back down to the 10 in a subsequent year. Then if I keep those cost sets continuing to go up, we'll jump up again for a brief year to maybe 12 to 13%, but we always continue to be driven back down to that 10%. But it does make it better. And at least we have the threshold. We have the threshold, and if you think about it, if we have a threshold of a flat 10%, every new kid does at least come with $800 now from the state.
So we've been at the threshold before, the lowest amount?
Well, we've been below that, yeah. Yeah, back in 2016, 2017, we barely were getting $600 per pupil.
So if you adjust for inflation, though, $800 is probably lower than $600?
I'm almost certain.
So
I'm almost
next
certain.
budget could be the lowest we've ever received from the state.
In contribution per pupil, yes. Yeah, I could do the math, not right here standing as we speak. That would be a phenomenal feat.
Math counts, kids, to come do it.
But my sense tells me, I think I've done the exercise before. A couple of years ago when we were at 900 per pupil, I want to say in order to have kept up, that number needed to be closer to 1,000. So with this being 800, 2 and 3 years out, yeah, we're going to be way behind with inflation where we quote unquote should be.
You roll that over 4 years, that's a couple mills that our taxpayers have to cover.
That's correct.
Because we're using old cost sets and they're not increasing those cost sets, or they're not increasing.
Not yet. That's one of the things, we got our work cut out for us, that's for sure. And everything that we can get that's better than this, obviously, from the state. What we can get them to talk to us about how we're growing. Most schools across the state of Ohio simply aren't growing. We're one of a very small subset of schools that are growing each year. Most public schools are not.
Any idea what percent of school districts would fall in the category of growing, probably over both cycles of both years of the budget?
Only about 80 of the, so if I look at at the end of 2022 through the end of 2024, there's only about 80 school districts out of 607 that grew both years of the biennium. No other schools across Ohio, they're just simply not growing in enrollment. Now, there's some COVID that we're shaking off. I actually think if I took COVID out of the mix, that number might drop. It might be fewer than 80 schools because some schools are just catching up with what they lost during COVID. We've caught up and then some.
So growth is not part of the school funding formula currently?
That's
is
correct.
What you're saying.
It is only in that each new pupil will drive, so if I go back to this slide, each new pupil will drive moving forward, for us, another $800 from the
Right.
state. That's the only way. That's
But there's
correct.
no increase in percentage or anything like that based on the fact that we're growing?
No, and you bring up an excellent point, Ms. Schreiber. That's one of the things I would love potentially to discuss with our legislators is some type of relief for fast-growing schools. That is not to in any way, shape, or form disparage other schools, but we have the added pressure every year of more and more students. And so think about it. Just statistics, again, which we all know what you can do with statistics, but each new kid we get, $805 from the state. But each new kid we get, based on CUP data just last year, $13,735 per student.
How much do we get from the state to help us build our buildings since we're growing so much?
None. No, the state does not provide anything at all to Olentangy schools to build buildings.
I want to go back a little bit to some of the things you talked about. You had mentioned that there is a base cost that the state determined. Do you mean the legislature?
That's correct.
Okay, and
They
so that's
determine
the-
all of the inputs. Essentially, it's every X thousand kids means so many teachers. Every X thousand kids means so many guidance counselors. Every X thousand kids means, and then if you have athletics, there's little, it's just this great big rocket science formula that at the end of the day computes how many FTE of all these different areas you need. And then they take EMIS data from 2022 and figure out, well, from 2022, what was the average cost across the state of Ohio for a teacher? What was the average cost for benefits? What was the average cost for a principal? And then each district's number is going to be slightly different just based on the EMIS cost data will be the same, but it will then turn into a different number based on how many FTE you're driving for teachers, administrators, student support, that sort of thing.
And that's just one number statewide for each of those?
So no, each district's total base cost will be slightly different. The inputs that drive base cost are what's the same. The cost of a teacher in Olentangy, per the state formula, is the same as the cost of a teacher in Akron Public. The total base cost number for teachers, though, will be different for us because we have more teachers than Akron Public. Make sense?
Right, but they're not adjusting for locality in any?
No.
Yeah,
No, and that is a factor that is significant.
right.
Significant factor, because it costs less, obviously, to live in some districts and significantly more for others.
That is correct. Yeah,
So they take more money, if I'm understanding right, they take more money because our houses cost more, but we don't get more money because our houses cost more.
so there's a slide coming. I'll show you that.
Can I ask one last question before you move
sure.
on? This last slide that you were on, thank you. That's assuming that the funding formula stays the same because right now it's being tied to our budget, right, which is biennial from the State House?
correct.
So when does the new budget come out?
The governor will lead with his budget sometime in January, February. It becomes a House bill, and then
Yeah.
the House wrangles with it until June 30th. We will know probably some initial hypotheticals, probably April-ish. When will the dust settle? I've seen it settle July 3rd before.
Right.
So
We're
yeah.
not anticipating major changes, but you never know with
Correct.
legislators.
That's correct. That's exactly
So
right.
you don't have a slide on here, but how does that compare to what private schools get?
Private schools get right now through auxiliary funding and administrative funding somewhere around $1,500 per pupil. So unfortunately, we're quickly going back. As you can see, this year that base cost of $1,435. Now let me qualify that $1,435. Remember, we're in a year where the phase-in isn't 100%. So we don't ultimately actually end up getting all $1,435 of that because there's some other constraints that are on top of it. But we ultimately, even if you had a 100% year right now, at $1,435 would not be getting what private schools get. And clearly, as we move forward, we'll be getting about half as much. This is just the same thing graphically. Here's the hypothetical. I'm going to assume, just to make the math easier, that the phase-in is fully phased in just so you don't have to try to, wait a minute, but we're only getting 2/3 of that delta, just to show you why there's a type of phantom revenue that has been created. And I know that's a term that's been around for a long time. Here's what phantom revenue means. So the formula says that in FY24 we were getting $19.92 per pupil. And let's just pretend for a hot second that it was 100% funded, and so it won't get reduced by the phase-in. We just saw we're dropping to $14.35. So we dropped $557 per pupil, which means that our base funding of $12,476,800 is lost from FY24 to 25. So the state's saying, you got richer, and so we're going to shift $557 per pupil your way because you should be able to pay for that. But we just saw what happens, and this is assuming 100% of the state funding. Again, we only went up $8,521,913 because we know that even though values were up 34%, our tax rates went down almost 22%. So that's an example of the formula is shifting and saying, well, when the formula does what it says, as a district, when you get richer, less money comes from the state. So that's almost what, right at $4 million that truly did not increase at the district level. From FY25 to 26, we go to the base of 805. That's a loss of an additional $630 per pupil. This drives base funding per pupil down another $14,112,000, even though if you look at the forecasted increases in real estate from 25 to 26, it's only $5.5 million. Now that would be, again, if I throw those phase-in numbers in, that's going to change this, but I just wanted to get the concept of even when the formula is totally phased in, this is the kind of dynamic, and it's not just us. There are schools around the state of Ohio. I believe the state from last year to this year, and I'm going to misquote the number, but it was anywhere between $500 million and $1 billion got shifted to local schools, not because the state pulled a fast one, not because they were being dirty. That's what the formula does, because remember, Franklin, Delaware, Fairfield, almost all the counties around us in the last year or two have had significant reappraisals. Where a school is at what's called the 20 mil floor, an increase of 30% means an increase of 30% in real estate. When you're above the floor like we are, an increase of 30% just means your tax rates offset any increases. So this is the kind of picture we get for state funding. We actually are falling to our low point in FY 2026. And if you wonder, well, why would it go up from 26 to 27? Well, remember, I'm going to allow 100% of the delta between where we were at 2020 to where we're supposed to be in 2026. I'm going to allow for that. And we're flatlined at $800 per pupil, so every kid brings in $800. Once you get past 2027 through 2029, our only growth is going to be increases essentially in population. That's it. Now, we did not have anywhere near $36 million in 2016, but we're also, by that point, 10 years later.
Public schools aren't eligible for capital improvement grants from the state, as far as you know?
So there are ways to get capital dollars from the state, but no, nothing like on the scale of what we would need in order to keep up building the schools. Yeah, I mean, the capital budget is a year out of phase with the operational budget. We looked into some things. A lot of things that they like to fund are broader public projects like amphitheaters. You know, they refurbish old performance spaces. They generally view schools as you've got your own thing. That's been my experience. So this shows the phase-in, just to prove that we are not, what you're seeing here is this year in FY 2025, we're only getting 66% of what the formula says we should get of the difference. And so we're losing about $12 million this year if the formula was fully phased in. Well, that number drops next year when we go 83% because we're getting more of our funding. And then there's no more lost funding after FY 2027. The formula is giving us exactly what it's supposed to. It just unfortunately happens to be giving us less than, on a per pupil basis, than what we would like. This is our total revenue over time. Again, we're not flatlining revenue. We're not being so conservative as to be absurd. Our revenue will increase to nearly $381 million, a little over $381 by the 28-29 school year. And then on the right, you can see the distribution. It's almost principally real estate, public utility, state funding. Public utility would be the public utility infrastructure, tangible personal property of gas companies, electric companies. There are no more tangible personal property taxes for private businesses. So now on the expense side, this shows where we think we're headed with enrollment and we're obviously showing where we think we have to go with certified staff in order to keep student-to-teacher ratios where we want them, where we're going with classified staff, and where administrative staff are. This is, again, a dual purpose. Left-hand axis is the staffing totals. Right-hand axis is our student enrollment. So our student enrollment here is just simply from the enrollment projection reports that our facilities committee will do for us. We'll see the newest version of that in just a minute. But you can see that in order to keep up, our staffing is going to be increasing over the next, and I took this one out to 31. This is beyond kind of the 5-year scope, but I just wanted to be able to project and show, the question came up earlier, what types of planning are we doing for facilities? We know in the next 5 to 7 years, even though we were disappointed with what happened in March, we're not going to continue to be able to grow like we are without incorporating some buildings. So some of that are in these numbers. What we have forecasted, our base wages are increasing with 2 components. The index or the salary schedule that we have negotiated with each one of our bargaining units. We also have a salary index even for our non-bargaining unit classified staff members. Administrative staff just simply goes up each year with what's called a COLA. The other bargaining units and other employees would have an index step and whatever might happen with forecasted increases due to negotiations. So you got to kind of put the 2 pieces together to get the total wage increase, and then obviously it's weighted far more heavily with the certified staff because of just the sheer numbers of certified staff versus those other components of our staffing. That drives then, you can see the personnel staffing changes and yearly changes in essentially wages. This is what we mentioned earlier. We're clipping along, and then in years where we open schools, we have slightly higher expenses, like last year in this, opening Peachblow Crossing, last year opening Berlin Middle School. But even in a year where we're just trying to keep up with the staffing, even when we don't have a new school, we're adding 7.5% roughly in wage expenses, because not only are we building in and forecasting increases for existing staff for wage inflation, but we're adding, in some cases, 40 and 50 new staff members, depending on which classification you're in.
So speaking about, when you say classifications, certified, classified, is that what you had in mind?
Correct.
Okay,
And administrative as well.
sure.
Yep. Our insurance costs are an area where I've made some adjustments. We've been carrying probably 6.5 to 7, maybe even 8% in some of our medical trend, and it's just not happening. That's great news. So that's not meant to be anything that's a bad thing. Our medical trend increases, I've backed them off to closer to 5.5, 6 moving forward. You'll see that makes a substantial change in the forecast. In a couple of slides I'll show you. Remember, if you remind me, I'll point that out. It's increasing. It's just not increasing at the pace it was increasing. So in orange, you would have insurance benefits for certified. In the gray, you would have for classified. And then the little sliver is workers' compensation, which, at $300,000 or $400,000 per year is nowhere near the magnitude of our healthcare expenses. This is our wage-driven fringes. As salaries go up, STRS, SERS, which is 14% of that, also goes up. Medicare would also go up. So that's what this is showing as well, a little more detail. When you put it all together, notice what's happening this fiscal year in 24-25. Why is that only 1.86%? Well, on tonight's agenda, one of the things that we're considering is a premium holiday. And I have reflected the premium holiday, which will reduce the expenses for the Olentangy schools by nearly $3.4 million this year. I've also, as I mentioned, cooled that medical trend off to around 5 to 5.5%. When you put those two pieces together, you get the 5% increase, but you're also then sawing off in one fell swoop 3.4 million of it. We're going up about 1.86%. The only reason in 2026 that it jumps like that is in any year where you have a premium holiday, if you're not forecasting it in the subsequent year, it goes back up by that amount. Does that make sense? But then you can see the 7.5, the 8, the 8.75. Once again, the reason that amount is greater than the medical trend of 5.5 to 6%, new staff. We have to compute in what our new staff costs will be. So remember the slide I showed just a minute ago with total revenue? Here's the slide with total expenses. It's going right now as projected to almost $477 million by the 28-29 school year. So what has changed from May?
Just one
Sure.
quick question as you close out expenses. What are we spending on trailers right now?
We're spending to install somewhere between 4 and 6 classrooms, which is in a unit. You know, when they bring in the two pieces of the trailer and they marry them together, there's usually between 4 and 6 classrooms. To put one of those together right now, to get all the other stuff, you know, the foundation, the awning, those are about $550,000. What happens the next year, though, is that some of those one-time costs fall off, and all we have is the residual lease. But we also then, in this forecast, are programming in, as we get more and more elementary schools that are full, we have to program in bringing in more of those modular units. By the time you get out to the 28-29 school year, I have a residual ongoing increase per year in costs of nearly $1.7 million a year to keep those modular classrooms up and running.
How many classrooms does that look like?
You know, we're kicking around what that will look like, and there are certainly numbers to be determined, but the forecast right now carries in a total of 20 by the time we get, now, not, I want to picture this correctly so that this isn't misquoted, not 20 different modular units, 20 classrooms. That would probably equate to about 5 to 6, maybe 7 locations where a 4 to 6 modular unit would be.
When we're done using those, how much, like when we buy a building, we still
have an
value
asset.
there. Sure. How much do we have left after we're done using them?
So these are not in any way capital expenses. These are all just simply operational expenses, and there is no asset when it's over. You turn it in like you turn in your leased car. It's not an asset. It's just operational dollars that you've spent.
Thank you.
So I think the more concerning trend to me is how sustainable is an average of 7% personnel cost increase per year. I can't imagine an employer in Central Ohio that is assuming their personnel costs are going up 7% a year.
So a lot of that will be determined by this slide. So where we actually end up when we negotiate, when we work out labor contracts, you can see in the 28-29 school year, I have projected that's the first kind of year. We have a couple of our bargaining units, or at least one of our bargaining units, which we know has been under contract with an extension through the 27-28. A lot of what you're speaking about, Mr. O'Brien, will be how we end up working with our labor force to what these increases look like. A lot of the step increases are already negotiated and codified in indices. So there's not nearly as much control on the bottom part of the graph without significant discussions. The top part of the graph is what most people, what gets quoted in a paper as the so-and-so school district and the so-and-so labor unions reached a deal to increase wages by blah. That's like the COLA piece. The bottom piece is embedded in salary indices. essentially, in any given year, kind of a rough effect here. If you just take the sum of those two, now roughly, if you take the sum of those two and you compare it to this slide, the delta is growth, new employees. As to sustainability, we're growing. These numbers right here, they will have to be closely examined, and we'll have to make sure that we're careful about how that looks moving forward, or we just continue to have operational ballot issues to be able to try to keep up with that pace. Now, I don't know if that answered your question effectively.
No, it does. I just think we need to think about and work through, like, for a period of time, we were a much younger, say, school district. Now we're hitting maturity. Like we're starting to hit parts of the curve on the salary scale that we need to be cognizant of. That's all.
Correct. That's right.
Despite these increases, you mentioned the other day including funding for safety and security in each building as opposed to sharing at the elementary. I think that's important. I appreciate you doing that.
Yep.
And before we get into too much, like the revenue side, I guess Representative Lear, Representative Lorenz, Senator Brenner either appear to be unwilling or unable to help us in that getting better revenue from the state.
So I suppose from their
And I know
perspective,
Lear is pretty much unwilling. I think Brenner's unable, and Lorenz is somewhere in the middle.
so hopefully we'll make progress. I appreciate the thoughts. There's a lot that could impact our bottom line. Recall on the revenue side, I'm conservative in state funding. My goal for this community is to work our rear ends off. Of course, we're not the only fish in the pond. There's 607 other schools plus an entire operational budget for the state of Ohio. I think they're aware, but we are struggling against, in some views, that the Olentangy district is more than capable of taking care of itself as opposed to schools that their main lifeblood is state funding. Do you think that's a fair assessment, Mr. Meyer?
Yeah, I think so. And,
Did I say that PC enough?
Well, but I think that also overlooks the
But
fact
that-
that we have private schools.
Not
that
saying they're
are getting
right.
state money too, that affects the overall education budget
Yes.
for the state. And I completely agree that there are public schools that require more of their budget from the state and from other communities, but, I think we'd be remiss to overlook the very real and growing amount that's going to private schools as well.
And don't forget, that's not just private school operating, that's private school facilities.
Yes.
That we are now venturing into. And Mr. O'Brien's point is well taken. I would offer that at the last budget cycle, Representative Lorenz was working with Mr. Jenkins on, I'm going to say this wrong, how they're measuring the income from median to average, which it sounds like so micro, like how are we even talking about that? But it helped our community because instead of including outliers, they were able to focus on something that's more representative. So I think that makes a difference. I think voting for fair school funding plan is the bare minimum, and one of our legislators couldn't even bring themselves to vote for their own community to have their schools funded. So your point's well taken.
Well, hopefully we can do better this round. That's the goal.
And like Mr. Jenkins said, we're going to continue to work and have conversations and try to work continue to work on those partnerships. Our representatives here in Delaware County and Senator Brenner do meet with the Delaware County superintendents once a month. They show up most of the time, and these are conversations that we're having with them.
I just don't want to give credit for perfect attendance.
Yeah.
So the big swings that I'll call your attention to, most of the numbers up there might not seem too exceptional. I'll call on the left-hand side of the ledger, revenue, is the shift in state. The 13.3 million, now this is over, think about it, this isn't just in 1 year, this is aggregate over 5 fiscal years. If you're wondering why doesn't it go to 2029, well, the forecast in the spring of 2024 only went through 28, so there's nothing to compare it to. So you have to go 24 to 28. The 13.3 million increase in state funding is a little bit of a gamble by your treasurer. That's me saying that I just couldn't stomach to just flatline it. I've got nothing in for the base cost increases, and I just couldn't stomach to say, and also, we're done. They're not going to go to 83% next year and 100% the following year. If it makes you feel any better, when I run the iteration by flatlining it, it's a matter of, do you want to, in the 28-29 school year, to end up with a $60 million negative carryover or $45 million negative carryover? What's the difference? It's not sustainable. So I feel like, to try to be cognizant of any accusation that, yeah, you've just been so conservative on revenue, you can't trust your forecast, I went ahead and took off one of those constraints. I took off the less impactful of the two, which, believe it or not, is the formula phase-in. Blows my mind, but that actually does not have near the impact as the growth in base cost. On the expense side, negative is good. That's what we want to see. And by far, benefits are the big driver there. That $27 million over those 4 years is impacted by forecasts to what we call a premium holiday or a premium expense adjustment, where neither the employee nor the district pays its monthly share into our healthcare loss fund. Not because we're skimping, but because our healthcare loss fund is very healthy right now. And we don't want to collect money from our residents or our employees if it's not reasonably tied to healthcare expenses that we believe are needed beyond a suitable reserve balance. So you actually take these two numbers and add the absolute value. 2028 is better by about $42 million if you do that. So if you take the aggregate change in those 4 years and you just add 29.5 plus 13.9, that is the impact in cash in 28. And 28 is, I think, if I'm remembering, if we go all the way back to the front, we're forecasting it at, does anyone remember?
Like negative.
$55,268,196. It's the following year, 28-29, which we have no basis of comparison, and that's the year, obviously, where the cash would be untenable and go negative. So those are your major changes, and that's why I will say a forecast is like any other forecast. It's going to be much, much better this time next year for the 25-26 school year. Right now, I would say at the end of this school year, whoops, I'll have 24-25 in pretty good shape. No, it should be used as a planning tool, but you can, especially in 4 and 5 years out, see, and I know it feels like a lot, 15, 20 million, but think about that, 15, 20 million on an aggregate each year, 300 to 350 million. So the scope isn't as dramatic as it seems. Those types of things in a 5-year forecast, 5 years out, can be expected. How'd I do? Any Yeah, any
further
questions, to me, it's just easier to take them during the slide, but if there's anything that wasn't clear or any wrap-up questions.
I think you held up well with cross-examination.
All right. So one of the things that's on tonight's agenda also, and I know we've talked about what's going on with our loss fund. We've spent a lot of time analyzing this with our actuaries. We've spent a lot of time talking about this with our insurance committee. We continue to have loss ratios that are excellent. Now, what I mean by loss ratio for members of the public, we spend $1 in, let's say, premium costs as a district. The loss ratio is how much of that dollar then actually gets spent on healthcare claims. If you're fully insured with a outside insurance company, you're absolutely giddy if it's a 95% loss ratio, because then by the time they throw in their profit, you're probably going to go over 100. Well, we are self-insured, and so we don't have that type of issue. Our loss ratios are running 88 to 90%. We continue to have excellent years. We also passed a policy as a district to analyze and review what are adequate reserves to pay our claims. Right now, those reserves are still over 70%, and that was with a premium holiday last year. So this year, the actuarial projections for the 24 calendar year, which were, again, only about 9.5 months through, we're trending at 8.36% below when you take losses and you compare them to premiums. That suggests that we're collecting in some ways around 8% more than we could have for this calendar year. And running that same actuarial projection for the 2025 calendar year is an additional 4.36% delta. It is why I am recommending the very exceptional, and this will not be a repetitive type of thing, but based on 2 banner years actuarially, based on where we are with our loss reserves, I actually get the pleasure this evening to recommend to the board a very nominal decrease in insurance premiums of about 3.8% on health care. Dental and vision are simply flatlined. I know that is something I've talked a lot with the insurance committee about. Never interrupt, never change, or never mess with your claims. If your claims say you go up 4%, you go up 4%. If you collect too much, you give a premium holiday. Right now, our claims and our actuarial data is saying don't go up at all, and in fact, go down a smidge. So it's with that pretext that I make this recommendation. The rates are on the board here, but certainly knowing what this recommendation means, I'm open to any questions or any thoughts about what this looks like.
questions.
So my only concern, and you and I have talked about this, is we've had phenomenal results. If we have a hiccup the other way, I'm going to be as quick to react as we are on the upside as we are to the downside.
Yes.
That's what we got to
We will all
set that expectation.
In fact, last year, and I know some of the members of the insurance committee are here, last year's actuarial numbers predicted and said we should go up by 4%, and we did. And now, as I just mentioned, we're through September, halfway through October, and we have data to suggest that that's about 8.3% too high. So absolutely, we will always follow the claims data. If the claims data says go up, it is always better to go up, and then if you over-collect, you give a premium holiday. This is an exceptional circumstance.
Questions? I do think it falls within sort of our broader philosophy of not taking on more, whether it's the community or our employees or whoever. And many of our employees are a part of our, live in the district. But we do have to be very, very clear that, we're going to be reactive to what we need to do there. And it's not just going to go down, 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 down.
That's correct. No, I think we've discussed that quite a bit. In fact, one of the members of the committee, when I made the same long-winded speech I just gave to you, he had this puzzled look on his face, and he raised his hand and he said, wait a second, I thought you said you always do the premium holidays and you never mess with the rates. And I said, thank you for listening, number one. I felt good about that. He said, but the slight difference is we're not messing with the rates. The rates are saying, when I say mess with the rates, what the actuarial model says, we're not deterring from that. Or I guess it's the wrong word there. We're not deviating from that, if that makes sense.
What groups are represented on the committee?
All of our groups, our Teachers Association, our Classified Aides Association, our Transportation Association, and our CMF. So
what was their thought of the cut in rates with the understanding that could roll right back up?
it has been a remarkably good group to work with. There has not been at any point in time, they always have all the data, the same data that you've seen has been in front of them the entire time. If I suppose it's one of those kind where speak now or forever hold your peace, they've not said anything in any way, shape, or form other than how much they appreciate being a part of the process. And I think they believe that we mean it when we say it, that we'll collect it if we need it. If we don't, and I hope our community believes this too, we're not going to collect funds that we don't need to use. And it gets even better.
Well, let's just
Slow down.
We went 20 years without a premium holiday. Now we've had 2 in like the last 3 years. So I don't want it to become the expectation that we have a premium holiday every year, because it may not happen.
I agree.
If it does, and I agree with you, if it's warranted, do it. If it's not, though, it can't be just one way. That's all, my only point.
And that is a very fair point. And, you know, it is something that ultimately is a recognition and a type of, you know, wage increase or expense decrease. You know, in the month of November, in some cases, some folks, you can see the rates that are on the board. Take a look at our PPO down at the bottom. Those are what, 206.60 for the employer share of the employee share of the PPO, and go down to the family and it's 556.40. So if we have an individual who is on the PPO family plan, they're going to get a $556.40 benefit in the month of November. I foreshadowed my next slide because that's when I said it gets even better. That's correct. That's exactly right. Yeah, any employee in this district can look. If you're single PPO, you'll get $206 back in your check. If you're family, $556. If you're HDHP single, $83.12. If you're family, HDHP, $446.
But if you're telling me like wellness is working, we're making better decisions on coverage, we're making better decisions on utilization, that's great. That should be shared.
Yes.
And I support that, but it's just,
I believe that.
I've seen it go both ways. That's my only.
I believe that to be true. And I believe I would also be the first one here that if the rates showed, and we'll have one of those years. It's the law of averages. Yep. At some point, I may be standing here explaining why we need an 8% increase. And if we do, that's what we have to do. So here's the rest of the story. Not only are rates falling, but we, after giving a premium holiday last year, now it was only through September, but our cash balance in our loss fund increased by $5 million from January to September. That means our reserves are above 70% when our guardrail is kind of a 25-35 and we shoot for 30. So I am also recommending per policy 6210.02 in the month of November that the employees and the district do not pay their share of the premiums into the loss fund. This is about a $3.4 million savings for our taxpayers in the community. If you also then look at the 3.8% anticipated decrease at January 1 of 2025, that's an additional $1.5 million. That's a $6.9 million benefit to our taxpayers of expenses that will not be paid. Okay, action items. Approval of the 9:26 minutes. I apologize that we have a couple more revisions on the 8:22 and 9:12. We're pedaling as fast as we can to get those in good shape. Unfortunately, we have a couple of setbacks here or there. Take responsibility for that. We'll get those straightened out. The acceptance of donations. We have $580 for Orange High School from the Orange Athletic Boosters. Just a shade under $6,800 from the Berlin Athletic Boosters for supplemental coaches at Berlin High School. $600 for the Work Study Club at Liberty from William Browning. Thank you, William Browning. And then $4,000 to the Olentangy High School Staff Fund, and that's from the Golden Arrow Yearbook. Again, the final two items, recommending the approval of the insurance rates effective January 1, 2025. I think I missed one. It should also say the insurance rates up there on that slide. I think it's in the agenda. It's just not necessarily on this slide. And then the final thing, as if that wasn't enough, is we talked last time about the permissive legislation to proceed with exploring the refunding of the 2015 and 2016 bonds. Again, that legislation does not pull the trigger on the transaction. Rather, it allows me to proceed with our municipal advisor and underwriters in exploring the viability of that project to save the district. I believe the estimates were somewhere between $5.7 and $6.3 million in debt service payments. And I have no public participation.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Jenkins.
You're a lot.
Yeah.
More now.
All right.
Need a Mountain Dew.
With no public participation, we'll move to our first discussion item. I do want to note for the students that attend, you're more than welcome to stay for the rest of it, but you're also free to leave. We will not take offense. So, there's been a lot. We'll move to our first discussion item, which is the enrollment projections with Ms. Drewitz.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
How many times have you done this?
A lot.
So thank you.
This will be my last time, though.
What? This is your last time?
This will be my last time. My report is only 20 pages, but it's also full of bad news.
I thought it was all good news.
Well, I don't know. A lot of your charts just kept going down and down. Mine just keep going up and up. So we can go through this pretty quickly. It really is the same as how we've been presenting it the last several years. So please shout out if you have any questions or comments as we go. Our enrollment projections are based on the September 4th enrollment that we had on that particular day, which is included here in the presentation. We always do a comparison of what we projected for this year and what we actually have. We're off by a very high 0.35% on overall from pre-kindergarten to seniors, so we think that's pretty good. You can see where we're off more significantly in kindergarten and first grade. That's always very hard to predict what those are going to be. So we're always working on ways to try to improve those numbers and trying to get them to be more accurate each year.
Just a quick question on this, because the projections are for the full 24-25 school year. The numbers that we're using now are going to continue to change throughout the year, so.
Yes,
Yeah.
our numbers are always based on that first Wednesday of September. So our projection is what we'll have on that first Wednesday in September. So all of our numbers are always based on that. Yes, we could have an increase in student population throughout this year, specifically in preschool years, because we have rolling enrollment and they can continue to enroll every single day throughout the year. But our numbers are always based on that first week of September.
I mean, it's such a difficult task to do, to try to forecast it at that point in the year. So, I mean, these numbers, I'm always amazed at how close, they are, right? I mean, obviously, we want to be the best we can, but having a 0.35 variance is very impressive.
I would say that our committee does a pretty good job of that, especially in one of these slides. We look at how Delaware County also does a projection of population, and they seem to be changing theirs every year quite significantly. So somewhere along the line, they weren't doing it quite as accurately. So I think I'm pretty impressed with what we can do. So this chart shows our projected enrollment over the next 10 years. We won't go through every single number, but as you can see, they are going up. Every single number across every single row is increasing, and we have a pretty little chart. I can do charts too. Now, I need to up my game and do the two-sided double chart thing that you were doing. I'll leave that up to the next group to do that. But as you can see, yellow, past numbers green, this year blue, going up, yay. I mean, we have to be doing something right. I mean, I think that's always the takeaway every year is they wouldn't be coming if you guys weren't doing a great job, administration, staff, everybody. So ultimately, this is good, but it's just going to keep coming. This is a beautiful little chart from the beginning of Olentangy till now, and look how little it was back then. It's so cute. Right? I don't know. I always like to brag. My dad was in the first graduating class of Olentangy High School, so he was in that little tiny part. These are our projections from the past several years, and just like I said, we're always trying to hone in on how we can perfect not only what our next year is going to be, because we're becoming pretty good at projecting the next year, but how do we get good at projecting 5-10 years out? Because obviously, as you saw from the last 90-page presentation, we're really looking at, what that looks like in 5 years from now. And so we want to make sure that we are projecting as accurately as possible, not trying to scare people and not trying to be too conservative, but trying to really be as accurate as possible.
So I guess part of the question is like, what needs to be true for the 2024 projection to be false? You know what I mean? Like, we have to have almost like a pandemic type experience in housing for us to get, like, if you look here, like 2016, I'm on the chart before, we kind of pulled back after like real estate kind of pulled back.
Mm-hmm.
But we're kind of assuming a normalized market. You'd almost have to have like a systemic event in real estate.
It would
to
have to be
that
something that
true.
lasts a significant amount of time, because even when we had real estate crash before, we continued to grow. I mean, if you
Right.
look back at this overall chart, we've only had, I think, 2 dips in population in the past since the beginning. I mean, it's just, we keep growing. It's kind of hard to not grow here. And then when you look at this chart, that one that was 2016, that was the last year that we had done our projections based on a different model. And we were not at that time looking as significantly at preschool and the specialized learning center. So we were really not looking at all of those specialized needs that we had in the district. And those are areas that are rapidly growing. So we think that we keep getting better on really noticing all of the different components that are going into this.
Yeah, so, and I guess my point is a little bit like, these aren't built on like super rosy projections. It's like, it's built on experience, right?
Say that again, Kevin.
What's that?
I'm sorry, I couldn't
It's
hear
not
you.
like built on like super rosy projections, like trees don't grow to the sky. At some point, there's a point where it stops, but yet, every time we do this, it seems like it gets more and more. And it's not like we've been wrong.
Right.
So,
At some point, it will go down because you will run out of land.
yeah.
I don't believe that it will go down quickly because people move out and families with young kids move
It's not gonna
in.
be like a,
Right, it's not
gonna
going to
be
be
a-
a cliff, right.
And
Right.
and that's where we're really getting to the true test of how we look versus how other communities look. Because we always see that report that says there's this algorithm that says you're going to dip this way based on the experiences of a lot of places. But as the Columbus market stays really hot, we're going to have to
Yeah.
see, does that happen? Do we have people that just move out, or are they staying in their homes? You know,
Right.
that'll really be the test.
Right.
To your
'cause-
point, there's no drop because you've built this out all the way. And we know this from our existing neighborhoods, that there's a pattern where the folks get older like me and you know what I mean? And you get new kids in. So it's not like people stay and then we don't have any more kids from that house.
Right, right. We're not going to become a community that's all senior citizens.
Right.
Right.
I mean, if you're Daberco's age, maybe.
So the way we do project is based on new housing that's being built, and we monitor that and we look at that. At some point in the near future, we really have to start looking at what is that turnover rate. And I know that Cooperative Strategies, Wolpert, who does the other enrollment projections, they're looking at that more closely of what that yield is of houses at different ages to see what that turnover is in population of students. So we need to start looking at that because, like I said, at some point, we're going to run out of land, so there won't be new houses. So in our model, that would mean that we're not going to continue to grow because there aren't new houses, but we are going to continue to, like, we're not going to summit, you know, we're not going to plummet. We're going to have to try to figure out what that happens. But I don't see that happening anytime in the next 15 years.
So I think last year, we looked at this about 2040, we start to level off.
Yeah.
But again, we don't drop off a cliff. We
Right.
start to
And the
level.
leveling is like decades.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So even once we get to our maximum point, which they call the maturity, which I don't know, it seems very sophisticated, but that maturity stays high for a very, very long time. So, I mean, even if we got there next year, whatever we need today, we would need for like 2 decades.
Yeah.
So whatever we get to that maximum point, we're going to need for a long time. It's not we're going to get to this maximum point and you're like, oh, we can shove people in for a year or two and we'll be fine because we're going to start tapering off. It's not tapering off that quickly, what I think, but. So Delaware County, like I said, does their projections. You can look it all up. They have an amazing website full of lots and lots of numbers. And their projections for this decade, 2020 to 23, they just said in their latest projection is going to be a 29% increase. Last year, they had said 24. If you look back in their 2017 projection, they had said 15%. So I don't know who did it back in 2017, but it's doubled what they had said then. And we're not even done with the decade, so who knows what. Their report comes out every November, which will be next month, so I'll be curious to see what that says. And then the following decade, which is why I'm saying I don't see any decline in the next 15 years, because they're saying the next decade, they're still seeing a 10% increase. Now, this is based on Delaware County, but our school district specifically, and overall population. So we seem to be trending about what they're saying right now. So if we look at that and the 2040 projection, we're looking at over 30,000 students. That's not a number that we've ever looked at before. And it's off the chart, literally, like off the top of the chart there.
We're going to need a bigger chart.
Preschool enrollment, the history in yellow has kind of been all over the place. We did have that big dip in it for COVID. As you can imagine, people didn't want to send their kids out in COVID. That makes sense. But it rapidly cut right back up to where it had been as if it never happened. And we see it continuing to grow. This is something that we're looking at in the future. Right now, we're looking at it as a percentage of kindergarten, but based on the information that we have from Dr. Fetty, we're looking at it maybe now as more of just a steady increase of itself, like looking at it as its own thing and not as any relationship to anything else. Kindergarten enrollment, like I said, our enrollment is based on housing. We're looking at our housing as remaining steady over the next 10 years. When we first started looking at this model, we're like, oh, that's going to start tapering down. We're not going to be building as quickly as we have been. But we have, if you look at the top left, our 8-year average is 764 new building permits for single family each year. Multifamily is actually, the 8-year average is 594. So we keep discussing that. We definitely get fewer students from multifamily. We were thinking that multifamily was going to taper off, and that's what we're showing in our model. But it is looking like, you can see the last 2 years, multifamily has been very, very high. It's very popular right now to be building multifamily. So we're really going to have to look at that in the next couple of years to see if we want to show that as projecting flat or projecting up. When we start changing any of those numbers to increase instead of being flat, it really changes these numbers in a very scary rate.
But that just seems to run in cycles. I mean, like we had a period of all single family died. Then
It does, yeah.
All multifamily. Then it just seems to run in cycles.
Yeah, if you look at these past 4 years, it's
Yeah.
just a reverse of each other, yeah.
But I
Like
wonder
the
if
light blue
going
lines, single
forward-
families up and multifamilies down, yeah, exactly. So it kind of goes back and forth.
But like, if land becomes more scarce, right, as you start to build out, does multifamily become more popular because density is more economically attractive to developers versus single family, right? So it's just thinking out loud on how that plays out, you know?
Right. I would guess that if you start building more multifamily and that's all people can have, then you're going to start seeing higher yields from that because families are
Yes,
going to move
yeah.
in there. They're not going to have anywhere else to live.
I agree. Yeah.
So I think at that point, then the yields from them start to become more the same. Instead, right now,
Yields
they're
have
very different.
Historically been low, could they step up?
I mean, you can see the multifamily that's going on now is becoming more and like more bedrooms per unit than they have been in the past. We've only been seeing 1 and 2 bedrooms, and now you're seeing 3-bedroom units pop up a lot because you get those people that want to come into the district, have that space, and then maybe they jump over to a house. But you're getting people coming in that have a family even in those units.
Or you'll see a higher turnover rate with houses too,
Yeah,
where,
yeah.
you know,
Right.
price will go up.
Yep.
Yep.
So our grade advancement that we have, we look at this every year to see how kindergartners become first graders become second graders, et cetera. The last couple years, we've looked at averaging several years because we had those COVID years, which are a little bit bizarre. So we were looking at a 5-year average last year. This year, we're going back to what we had been doing previously, which was a 2-year average of the past 2 years. So those are the percentages that we're looking at for the growth factor for each grade advancement. You can see elementary school is at a rapid rate of increasing over the next 10 years. And looking at that, we did add 35 new classrooms at Peach Blow Crossing. So our overall number of classrooms that we have went from 503 to 538, which is very helpful. But if you look at our chart and the number of classrooms that we need, we're basically saying that next year we would be needing 542 classrooms, and we have 538.
Is this including the trailers?
It is not.
Okay.
This is actual, that's a very good question, actual building space, yes. Yeah. So we're showing an immediate deficit in the number of classrooms, and then, of course, it continues to get worse as time goes on. Middle school, again, is going up. Same thing with the number of classrooms. So we're looking at how many core classrooms, the capacity in both the arts and PE and things like that, and also in the lunchroom capacity. And we're looking at having a need for a middle school. We're showing in the next couple years as being close. In 27, 28, we're looking at only having 8 extra classrooms spread out across all of the middle schools. And then in 32, 33, we actually have a deficit of classrooms. High school, same, continues to grow. We look at how many students are in each high school on average. If you were able to evenly distribute them across all the high schools in 10 years, you're going to have 2,369 students on average in the high schools, which is more than we had at the peak of enrollment back a few years ago before we built Berlin. And then I say thank you.
Well, so maybe to wrap it up, the most pressing need still remains at elementary.
Yes.
The most immediate need,
Yes.
then kind of middle and high. Because
Yes.
it's like kind of the thing going through the snake, right? So it's in the elementary today, it's going to lead to the middle and high. So that story hasn't changed.
It hasn't changed.
So
And
when we
I
were at
think,
the
I mean,
ballot last year-
administration would have to look at it, but I think there's ways to accommodate middle school and high school in various ways more than you could elementary school students. I think high school, you could come up with different scenarios with them, home, school, online school, shifts, different things. But elementary school, yeah, you have a need.
And we're kind of managing it today with kind of short-term strategies that ultimately we're going to have to address at some point.
So, yeah, exactly right. And you can see, if you go back to the elementary slide, and Mr. Jenkins addressed this with the modular classrooms, but you can see -4, -13, -24. So the longer we go without an elementary school, that's a strategy that we got into last year as far as modular classrooms. And then also pocket redistricting, where we'll try to balance enrollments based on that year. So those are things that we're doing, but at the end of the day, yeah, at the elementary, there's a huge need for additional buildings. We can kick the can down the road, so to speak, at middle school and high schools because of scheduling and how we can schedule and utilize. But again, at the end of the day, when our schools continue to increase enrollment-wise, so I'll talk about the middle school and high school, it does take away from the student experience. It takes away from student opportunities. It does add concern for safety as our schools become larger population-wise. So those are all critical factors in our continued conversation for the need for us to construct additional buildings.
And really, the challenge of timing is, an elementary school, if we pass it on the ballot, we can construct relatively quickly, but the others take a while.
Right.
And so it delays that even further as we go on down the line of
And every year we wait, it costs more money.
Right, that's right.
So, for sure the challenge, and as you can see from the report, growth's not slowing down here. Families will continue to move here, and we're going to enroll kids, and we need spaces to educate them.
Yeah.
I mean, building on what you said about every year you wait, I mean, if you figure $350 million of buildings at 5%, every year we wait, it's continues to compound. Then you're throwing money away with trailers, so you have nothing left. It's a really expensive endeavor to do things for expediency rather than for fiscal responsibility.
Yeah. And again, we're doing such a good job with what we're mitigating right now as far as what we're implementing to provide great experiences for our students and staff. But, it continues to be a challenge and will continue to be a challenge for us.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at 10 years out, we're at a deficit of, I can't read that, 141 classrooms? That's trailers everywhere.
That's a lot of
Yeah,
trailers.
That's
yeah, absolutely.
every
That's a lot of
elementary
trailers.
school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And
I think
it-
we had figured out at our last meeting that 25% of elementary school students would be in trailers.
Yeah. And right now, when it's just isolated at an individual elementary where the whole community's not seeing that, but year over year now, we will start to see that.
I mean, that's thousands of kids in trailers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Don't let her leave before we thank her.
Well, and I
because-
want,
Well, so I was gonna say,
I
I
wanted to
didn't-
say, I wanted to say because I was going to say this at the end of your presentation, but Sharon is moving on, but we for sure, administratively, and I know the board probably will echo this, we appreciate all your years of service. It's just been commendable, and the expertise and the service that you provided to our district year over year over year is very much appreciated. So I know that I can speak for Mr. Gordon, who's been on the facility committee for years, and again, appreciate just the level of professionalism that you've offered to the district, and for sure your commitment to service to the district to allow us to make these really important decisions and informed decisions as a district. We really appreciate all of the work that you've done.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's I don't know that we have to approve your resignation, do we? Like, we could just say no. But you are just such a tremendous asset. One of the great joys my first couple of years was serving on the facilities committee and just seeing how incredibly well-run that group is, and that's because of your leadership, right? It's an incredibly thoughtful group, so we are so absolutely in your debt.
But yeah, so Sharon took over from Ralph, who was, unbelievable. And Sharon, you took it to another level, right? So we appreciate the work you've done.
Thank you.
Countless hours that you've
Yeah.
put into this, so we appreciate it very much.
And the accuracy, I mean, our decisions are only as good as the data we have in front of us. And for you to come to us time after time again, what was it, 1/3% variance from your,
So, who's next?
Jeff, we're working on it. Sharon, we're working on
Not
it,
that,
right?
Sharon, please don't take that the wrong way. But,
It's,
okay.
thank you.
I've been holding off to find the next person.
Right. We will move on to our next discussion item, Dr. Fetty, the first reading of our second tranche of board policy updates.
Thank you. Good evening. I also just want to say I really appreciate working with Mr. Jurowitz all these years. A lot of things go into it to make Olentangy such a great place, but people like her who dedicate their expertise, for $0 for so many
Right.
years, she's really an asset to us. So
Well, then I think her last, when did your daughter graduate, 21?
She graduated in 2020.
2020.
Yeah.
So she hung on for 4 more years.
yeah, exactly. Gratefully.
We're
So
going to name one of the trailers after you.
Kidding.
deserves. So.
We have a policy against that. That's okay.
It's only buildings, not trailers. But it would be temporary.
All right, go ahead.
There are 7 policies that are up for a first reading tonight that have been posted for comment. 3 of them are complying with laws that were signed this summer that take effect at the end of this month. Are there any questions on the policies right now that I can answer? The policy committee, I will say, met 2 weeks ago, and we have a policy chairperson who is also Chris Mazzola, who is also a wonderful servant of the district, who I will give credit to. Any questions I can answer? Thank you.
We'll have our second reading next time, so. Good, all right.
Yes, encourage feedback from those on the website, I think.
Yeah, for sure, absolutely. And I know we do get some feedback. I know some teachers certainly Okay, so we're going to move on to our action items here. The first we have is our board consent action item regarding the recommended approval of the enrollment projections that we just heard Ms. Jurowitz present. Can I have a motion to approve those enrollment projections?
So moved.
A second? I'll second it. Any discussion? All right, hearing none. Mr. Jenkins?
Dr. Wallach,
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien,
Yes.
Ms. Schreiber,
Yes.
Mr. Lester,
Yes.
Dr. Dabrico.
Yes.
And then, Mr. Jenkins, these next two on a consent, we had the first one labeled as consent.
So I noticed that you could just as easily have drug 8A down to one by one. I had intended for 9A and B to be one by one,
Okay.
unless anyone would like to instead move them into a consent calendar. But yes, it didn't necessarily make sense for 8A to be a standalone item for consent.
Okay. So we'll take these individually then. So then the first board action item under Section 9 is the school self-insurance fund, the premium holiday recommendation, which we heard Mr. Jenkins present on. Can I have a motion to approve that?
So moved.
A second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? All right, Mr. Jenkins?
Mr. O'Brien,
Yes.
Ms. Schreiber,
Yes.
Mr. Lester,
Yes.
Dr. Dabrico,
Yes.
Dr. Wallach.
Yes.
Okay, the next is the recommended approval of the insurance rates. Again, as Mr. Jenkins presented, effective January 1, 2025. Can I have a motion to approve that?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Any discussion? All right, Mr. Jenkins?
Ms. Schreiber,
Yes.
Mr. Lester,
Yes.
Dr. Dabrico,
Yes.
Dr. Wallach,
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien.
Yes.
All right, now we have the treasurer consent action items. Mr. Jenkins, can you please present those?
Board members, as noted in my treasurer's report, I have several items tonight that I'm recommending to be approved by one single motion and action, unless you would like to have them pulled out separately. Item A are the September 26 minutes. Items B and C are approving the restated and revised minutes for August 22nd and September 12th. Item D is the acceptance of the donations noted in the report. Item E is approval of the permissive refunding resolution. And then item F, as noted, is taking care of all of those in one single vote, unless you would like to talk about any item separately.
Okay, would anyone like to discuss any of those separately? All right, hearing none, can I have a motion to approve?
I'll move.
And a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All right, Mr. Jenkins?
Mr. Lester?
Yes.
Dr. Dabrico?
Yes.
Dr. Wallach?
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes.
Ms. Schreiber?
Yes.
All right, Mr. Meyer, the superintendent consent action items.
Thank you, Mr. Lester. Board members, I recommend approval of the following superintendent consent action items A through F. A, specific human resource items certified. B, specific human resource items supplemental. C, specific human resource items classified. D, specific human resource items classified substitutes. E, student overnight out-of-state field trips. And F, business management and facility items, as noted in my superintendent report, transportation as impractical, and the chiller at Liberty High School. I'm asking you to approve these items by one single action and vote, unless you'd like to discuss any of these separately.
Okay, would anyone like to discuss any of these separately? All right, hearing none, can I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All right, Mr. Jenkins?
Dr. Dabrico?
Yes.
Dr. Wallach?
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes.
Ms. Schreiber?
Yes.
Mr. Lester?
Yes. All right, next we're going to go into, or take a motion to go into executive session as permitted by revised code 121.22 G6 to discuss details relative to the security arrangements and emergency response protocols for a public body or public office believed to reasonably be expected to jeopardize the security of the public body or public office. I will note that we will only be reconvening to adjourn. We will be taking no further action otherwise. Can I have a motion to convene to executive session?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
All right, any discussion?
No.
All right, Mr. Jenkins?
Mr. Lester?
Yes.
Dr. Dabberco?
Yes.
Dr. Wallach?
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes.
Ms. Schreiber?
Yes.
All right, we are in executive session. Thanks, everyone. All right, it is 9:26. We're coming back out of executive session. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
You have that right? Second. Any discussion?
None whatsoever.
Yes.
Lester?
Yes.
Dr. Dabrico?
Yes.
Dr. Wallach?
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes.
Ms. Schreiber?
Yes.
All right, we are adjourned. Thank